Okay. Good day, people. It's an honor to be here. Before I start talking about my presentation, I'd like to honor Treaty 6 territory that we're standing on today. And Treaty 6 territory, I don't normally just acknowledge the land. I acknowledge the ancestors, our ancestors, indigenous ancestors that once walked this land, that shaped it, that prepared it for many generations to come. And today I also want to acknowledge L.Y. Cairns for allowing me the opportunity to utilize their school for this presentation. And as we begin the presentation, I'd first like to introduce myself. I have a Cree name, and my Cree name is Okimau Mahikan. And when I translate that into English, it's known as King Wolf, and that's my ceremonial name that I normally use when I'm in ceremony, but today I use my English name, which is Philip Campio. I'm originally from Treaty 8 territory in a place called Driftbile First Nations. And today I make my home in Treaty 6, and I have a traditional right to be here because my grandmother is originally from this area known as Alexander First Nations. Her name was Mistahaya Snugiuskyu Kapamutit. And today, she once roamed this land that was known as Papa's Chase, and that's where we're located today. So welcome, I welcome you to this presentation. One of the things that I need to explain to you that's very, very important, whether you get an elder, a knowledge keeper, an indigenous person that's going to teach you how to make teepees or anything to do with the indigenous culture, one of the first things that should be honored is what we call tobacco. And in this pouch, I have tobacco. And that tobacco is very important. What the tobacco does is opens the doors for you to understand the indigenous culture. But it gives you that elder, that knowledge keeper, the traditional right to pass the teachings on to you. And that's why it's really important. It can be a pouch, it can be different forms of tobacco. Personally, I like natural tobacco, and there's a site that you can go to get that indigenous tobacco. That's the traditional way, and tobacco is really important. And I share that with you, and I hope that if you bring some indigenous worker into your classroom, that you'll honor them with tobacco. Thank you. So, to begin, there's a lot of information that you're going to need, a lot of material. Well, not a lot, but some. So to begin, you will get an email sent to you for a pattern that looks like this. It's a Tipi pattern. Today we're going to make it out of paper, and that we'll have to cut it out. And I'm going to explain each step to you. But before I do that, I have a slide presentation that you're going to be able to look at. And as you go through the slide presentation, it's going to talk about how teepees were originally made, what they were made from a long time ago, when indigenous people utilized them as homes. Then it's going to talk about painted teepees, and you'll see the differences on the painted teepees. Then the Cree teepee that we'll be making today. And then the community, what teepees are utilized for today in the community. They're just not an art design that set up in the yard, backyard, or out in the woods. Today they're more about community, and they're also utilized in school to elaborate on the indigenous culture. And then from the community work, you're going to be able to learn how to make a miniature teepee. And today we're going to make them out of paper, but if you want to spend a couple more bucks, you can also make one out of canvas. And that's what they're made of today, is a nice heavy canvas. And then there's other ways. There's art you can put on the teepee, but you will see the difference in the styles of art that you will create. And then now it's your turn to design a teepee. So welcome to my teachings, and we'll begin. Now we talked about the outline that you're going to have. You're going to cut it out. To do art, you're going to need a pencil and an eraser and a ruler. Along with those, to do art on the paper, you have crayons. You can also need tape. And these are what I call, they're actually kebab sticks. But I use these for the teepee poles. And you'll see as we begin the process of putting a teepee together, they're very important. And then for the artwork, you're going to have a variety. You can use stencils. And if you're a really good artist, you can freehand it, or you can cut the stencils out, and then you get a variety of stencils that are nowadays you can just download on the internet. Or you can choose to buy stencils that you can cut out. And it's really important. You have different varieties of not only animals, but shapes that you can add to your teepee. And you have all these stencils. And another way is with stencils is carbon paper that you can use. So those are some of the main items that you're going to need to build your teepee. And as we begin to start it, I'm going to talk about the design of the teepee and how the indigenous people originally painted their teepees a long time ago. So we'll begin. Thank you. So a long time ago when teepees were painted, originally teepees were made from buffalo hide, and they would be painted. And how they painted them was with ochre paint they utilized. And the Blackfoot tribe was one of the first tribes that would only paint their teepees. And the teepees originated from the Plains tribe in the south. The Blackfoot, the Sioux, the Cheyenne, like Lakotas, Nakotas, and other tribes in the south. And later in life, Cree people never originally had teepees. We borrowed the design from the southern tribes. And when we borrowed the design, traditionally, we never got the right to paint teepees. As an elder later in life, I went to the Blackfoot tribe and to an elder and asked him to pass me the traditional right to paint the teepees. And how he did it was, he said, they would break the teepee down into three areas. And as you could see here, this is the base of the teepee. That's where it sits on the ground. And the very bottom, like here where the door is, that bottom space belongs to Mother Earth. So if you want to paint anything that walks this land, anything that lives on this land, that's where you would paint. Animals, plants, water life, and even human beings. The middle part, we call that our special place. It's a sacred place. And sometimes Blackfoot tribe, if they wanted to specifically paint there, they would have to go in the bush with an elder, and they would fast 2 days, 2 nights, and then they would get a vision as to what they could paint. Then the very top, and these little points here are called smoke flaps. And the very top of the teepee belongs to the sky people. So anything in the sky, the stars, moon, sun, birds, clouds, and even the lightning, that's where you would paint that. And the colors would determine what you felt comfortable with. As you know what ochre is, it's a sandstone, and it comes in various colors, reds, browns, and yellows, and even grays that they utilize. But today we're going to use crayons. So that's a good point to remember, is that you want to break your teepee up into 3 areas when you paint it. And that's how we're going to paint it today. When you're ready to, before you paint, I want to explain more about the teepee hide. And And originally, like I mentioned earlier, it's made from buffalo hide. But in order to prepare the hide, there was a long process. First, the warriors would get buffalo. And a family-sized teepee between 16 and 17-foot diameter would usually take about 25 buffalo skins to make one teepee. And the process, as you could see here, is you had to prepare the hide by starting to, you stretch it. This is a little bit more modern. It's stretched on a trampoline frame. But you would make, out of teepee poles, you would make a frame, like a picture frame, and you would stretch the hide on there. But you would have to scrape the flesh off. Then you flip it over and you scrape all the hair off. Then once you had that process done, then you would take it off the frame, and you would literally mix two parts of the buffalo onto the hide. The first part is the brain, the buffalo brain, and the second part is buffalo fat. You would almost cook them, but you would mix them in a pot, really nice. Then literally take a handful and you'd rub it on the hide. And how you rubbed it, if this was a hide, you would hold it and literally work it in. And if you ever seen a hide that the hide that is being prepared with brain, when you're done the process of scraping, the hide kind of looks gray, off-white. The more you rub the brain on it, it turns white, a lighter color. Then once it turns that lighter color, you know it's taken the brain. Because what happens is that brain works into, and it has thousands and thousands of molecules that are being, the hide, not the brain, the hide has thousands and thousands of molecules. And when the brain rubs in there, it releases them. Then that hide becomes soft, and it stays soft, like a fabric. Once that process is done, the final process before you can sew it together is you had to smoke the hide. And the reason they smoke it is not so much to make it brown. What it does two things. It makes it water repellent, so when the rain is pouring down, it doesn't seep through the hide. Rain will keep rolling down. And the second thing is inside the teepee, there's always a fire pit. So when you have an open fire, sparks bounce off the fire, and when they hit the hide, it's not going to penetrate a burnt hole through it. It'll just fall down, and it won't burn that hole. But if that hide is not done properly, it'll burn a hole through it, even though it's a split second. So that's the reason why, and that could take anywhere from a week to 2 weeks just to prepare one hide. And that's how they would do it. And then they would sew it together. And how they sewed it together a long time ago is like cross stitch. They used a bone from an eagle that's really sharp, like an awl, and they would literally be like this, really sharp, and they would literally poke holes about every half inch, and then they cross stitch, and they used sinew. And sinew originally came from the buffalo. It's like a tenant. And the best part, the strongest sinew you can get from a buffalo is from the neck to the tailbone on the back strap. And you pull that off. If you can imagine a cheese stick, I'm sure you must have eaten one, and how you pull it apart to eat it, that's exactly how the sinew is. You have to pull it apart to make a thread. And that's how they were sewn a long time ago. And then you have your teepee. So when you decide to print your pattern that I'm going to email to you, you want to make sure you get paper that's 11 by 14. That's the size you will need, and it'll be like this. Then once you have it printed like this, then the next step is to cut it out, and that's how it's going to look. And when you lay a teepee down, it's like half a circle. And that half a circle is based on the circle of life. And originally that circle of life, believe it or not, came from the woman. A grandmother had a dream on how to make the teepee. And in the language in the South, that when you interpret in their language, Tipi, it means life back, preserving life for indigenous people. And it actually represents, she was told, when you build this teepee, we're going to call it the skirt for Mother Earth. They call that's what it represents in their language, and it's like going back into the life of your grandmothers. So that's what it'll look like. And before the next step after you have it cut out is you want to do your art. Really important. And I used a couple stencils here. I'm not going to go into detail on how to actually do it. I'm just going to show you. So I chose a buffalo. And we talked about the 3 phases of the teepee, the 3 spaces. So I chose the bottom, Mother Earth. And I'm going to start with a buffalo. But it's really important, as you could see, the teepee, when it stands, this is kind of what they'll look like when they're done. This one's not totally done, but that's how they'll look. So you got to imagine the circle of life here when they're sitting like that. So when you're going to draw the teepee, if you're going to draw a buffalo, you got to make sure that I already marked it. I use a ruler, and then I use like right here, I measured 1/2 inch from the bottom. You'll have a dark line when you trace them. And then I mark 1/2 inch here, and I know it's important when I put animals, if I'm going to put 2, I want them walking to the same direction around the teepee. I don't like them, because when you put animals facing each other, it's like you're having those animals challenge each other. And spiritually, we want them to walk in unison. They walk in the circle of life. So what I do is I make sure they're both facing the same, walking the same direction. But if you're going to use an animal, it's really important. I put a pencil mark here, and another one here. Because when the teepee's standing, if I don't put the pencil mark, they're going to be walking uphill or taking a nosedive. If you don't use that process, that art, that math. Teepees are based on math. If you're good at math, it'll turn out perfect. And my math is not the best, so good luck. That's really important. And then, as you know, this 1/2 circle right here, that's the entrance to the door. And these 2 parts here, one of the other things I do is I go like this from here. Before I even do anything, I fold them and make a crease on them. And you'll know why once that's done. You'll know later on. These are called the smoke flaps. So when you put them out, they're going to stick like that when you put them together. So it's really important to do that. And then you want to make sure, if you have whether you have a mark on the outline, you want that to be on the outside, because that's where you're going to do your art. And either way, and if you don't want to mark, then you could flip it around and there'll be no mark. But I chose that way. Then that's how you start. Then once you've done your art and you're happy with it, the next step is you got to take this one. And this is where it's really important, because this is where the teepee poles start. Oh yeah, and the art, I also use carbon paper for the art. And that's where you would, I'm sure you all know how to use carbon paper. So I don't have to demonstrate that, but here, this is where the sticks come in. What I do is I fold it in half. Right there. It's really important to do this part. Trying to get it as even as you can, because that determines the center of your teepee. Then on this particular size, I'm only going to use five of these teepee poles, what I call teepee poles, for the going around. And traditionally, there would be 13, but that's a lot of poles to put on a small little teepee. So to make it simple, today we're going to use 5, and I'll explain that to you how that process is. So the first thing you got to do is you start from the center, and I know the space here already. From here, And I don't go right to the door, I go about an inch and some before it. So what I do here is on a ruler, I'll go 4.5 inches. Put a pencil mark there, and then from there I'll go another 4.5 inches. Right there. And then I also have a pencil mark dead center. Then the same thing, 4.5 inches. On this side, pencil mark, and another 4.5 inches. And you don't want the poles right close to the door, because they'll be obvious. And as you could see on the teepee, they're always away from the door. And then what I do is I'll take a little piece of tape, maybe an inch long, then I put it on the bottom of the pole, right there. Then right here in the center, I start with the first one. Right on the pencil mark, make sure it stays close, just below that point where the opening is. And you're going to do that to all 5, but you want to follow the sequence and just follow it like the circle of life. And this one I made a mistake already. I got to take it off. You want to make sure the bottom of the pole is above the paper, not sticking out. So the next one, as I mentioned, will be right on top, this here. Oh boy. Once I have all 5 on, they always go on top the last one. Then what I do here, once I get these on, then I'll grab another tape about 2/3 up. Make sure it's right here in the center, and about 2/3 up right there. And just do that to all of them. They're not all even, but they'll work out. Then all you do is you'll grab another tape and you'll put it right here. This is what we call the lacing pins area, where the lacing pins would go, but we're not using lacing today. This is going to be our lacing pin. So I put it kind of right about there. Then what I do here is you grab the top there and then just kind of go underneath, press it. Then you could put one on the bottom, and there's your teepee. And then later on, after you're done that, there's 2 more right here you could see. And these ones you have to, when you have your teepee pressed out where you want, you tape these to the bottom. Like that. So those are how, because this one's been folded so many times, it doesn't want to stay flat, but once you tape these down, it'll hold it like that, see? You want them open, and then you could push this up. So that's how you make a miniature teepee. And it's really important, the last part, when you're doing your art, as you could see, when they're laying down, you can see here, you're going to probably put art on your smoke flap, but when you're standing up, you're not going to see too much from the back unless you're looking at the back of the teepee. So it's important, whatever you have here in this particular part painted, you want to coordinate that with here. Like you can carry it on right to the flap, because as you can see, when they're open, it'll look nice. Otherwise, it's just going to be plain white. So those are important things to remember when you're doing your artwork. So I just want to say good luck, have fun, and don't be afraid to make mistakes, because it's paper. And the other thing is that if you want to spend a couple more bucks, you can buy canvas, then make it art canvas. And if you want to be really traditional, you can look for a traditional hide. Doesn't necessarily have to be moose hide. Could be deer, could be moose, but hide looks really good. So thank you very much and have fun.